My wife cheated with her personal trainer and tried to steal my family trust, so I sued her for fraud, took everything back, and left her broke. I used to believe that love could conquer anything, until I discovered my wife had been calculating the exact dollar amount my death would be worth to her. My name is Brandon Whitmore, and I'm 36 years old. For the past 12 years I've been working as a private equity manager in Manhattan, building a career that most people would consider successful. But success, I've learned, can make you a target in ways you never expect, especially when the person aiming at you shares your bed every night. I met Sabrina 8 years ago at a charity gala in the Upper East Side. She was 25 then, a freelance interior designer with striking blonde hair and an infectious laugh that could light up any room. I was completely smitten from the moment she approached me at the bar, complimenting my choice of whiskey, and somehow making small talk about investment portfolios sound flirtatious. "You know," she had said, stirring her martini with a perfectly manicured finger, "most men your age either talk about their ex-wives or their stock options on the first conversation. You're actually interesting." We were married 18 months later in what everyone called the wedding of the year. Sabrina planned every detail meticulously, from the imported Italian roses to the crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's cars. At the time, I thought her attention to luxury was charming, a sign that she appreciated the finer things in life that I could provide. What I didn't realize was that she was already doing research. My family's wealth didn't come from my job, though my salary was substantial. The real money came from my grandparents, who had built a manufacturing empire in the 1940s and established a family trust that had been growing for generations. The trust was structured to provide for family members and their spouses, with the bulk of assets transferring upon death or specific life events. For the first few years of our marriage, everything seemed perfect. Sabrina transformed our penthouse apartment into something that belonged in Architectural Digest. She had an eye for design and a talent for making our home feel both elegant and comfortable. Her business was thriving, with high-profile clients who paid premium rates for her services. But looking back now, I can see when things started to change. It began with innocent questions about my family's financial arrangements. During dinner conversations, she'd casually bring up topics like estate planning or life insurance. "Brandon, honey," she'd say, cutting into her perfectly prepared salmon, "do you think we should update your beneficiary information now that we're married? I read this article about how complicated things can get if something happens." I thought she was being practical, maybe even caring. When she suggested I increase my life insurance policy, I saw it as her way of ensuring our future security. When she asked about the family trust structure, I assumed she wanted to understand how our finances worked as a married couple. "It's quite substantial," I had explained one evening, showing her some of the documentation. "The trust has specific provisions for spouses, and everything transfers automatically if something happens to the primary beneficiary." Her eyes had lit up in a way that I interpreted as relief about our financial security. Now I realize it was something else entirely. The changes in her behavior were subtle at first. She started working later, taking on what she called high-maintenance clients who required evening consultations. She'd come home after midnight, smelling faintly of expensive cologne that wasn't mine, explaining that she'd been at some networking event or client dinner. "The design business is all about relationships," she'd say, kissing my cheek before heading straight to the shower. "You have to wine and dine these people if you want the big contracts." I believed her because I wanted to believe her. My own work kept me busy enough that I didn't think too deeply about the inconsistencies in her stories. When she said she was working on a project in Brooklyn but came home from the opposite direction, I assumed she'd made other stops. When she started going to a new gym across town instead of the one in our building, I thought she wanted variety in her workout routine. The first real red flag came about 6 months ago when I found her researching divorce lawyers on her laptop. She'd left it open while taking a shower, and the browser history showed multiple visits to websites about high-net-worth divorce settlements and spouse rights to family trusts. When I confronted her about it, she had a ready explanation. "Oh, that," she laughed, wrapping a towel around herself. "Jessica's getting divorced and she asked me to help her research attorneys. You know how messy her situation is with Richard's business assets." Jessica was one of her college friends who was indeed going through a divorce, so the explanation seemed plausible. But something about Sabrina's body language felt off. The way she avoided eye contact, the slight tremor in her voice when she spoke. I started paying more attention after that. 2 months later, I discovered the text messages. Sabrina had always been protective of her phone, but she'd gotten careless during a weekend in the Hamptons. She left it charging in the bedroom while we were having breakfast on the terrace, and it kept buzzing with notifications. The name that kept appearing was Marcus Trainer. I knew Sabrina had started working with a personal trainer at her new gym, but the frequency of these messages seemed excessive for a professional relationship. When the phone buzzed again with a message that started with "Can't wait to see you tonight, beautiful," I realized we weren't talking about workout schedules. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through more of their conversation history. The messages painted a picture that made me physically sick. This wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated plan. "Just need to be patient a little longer," one of Sabrina's messages read. "Once I get what I'm entitled to from the trust, we can be together properly. The lawyers say I have a strong case for spousal inheritance rights." Marcus had responded, "How much are we talking about here? Enough to set us up permanently? Let's just say we'll never have to worry about money again. The trust is worth over $50 million, and as his spouse I'm legally entitled to a significant portion. Even if we divorce, the prenup has loopholes if I can prove certain conditions." I felt like I was reading about strangers, not my wife and her lover. The coldness in how she discussed our marriage, the casual way she talked about our life together as a financial transaction. It was devastating. But the worst part was yet to come. I kept reading, discovering that this affair had been going on for over a year. Marcus wasn't just some random trainer she'd met. He was someone she'd specifically targeted after researching the most expensive gym in Manhattan, the kind of place where wealthy women went to find attractive men willing to play the long game for financial security. "You were right about rich guys," she'd written to him early in their relationship. "They're so busy making money, they don't pay attention to what's happening at home. Brandon probably wouldn't notice if I disappeared for a week." The messages revealed that she'd been methodically studying our family's financial structure, consulting with lawyers about her rights as a spouse, and even investigating ways to challenge the trust provisions if necessary. She'd taken photos of confidential documents from my home office, forwarded emails about family financial matters to a private account, and maintained detailed notes about every conversation we'd ever had regarding inheritance. Most chilling of all were the messages where she and Marcus discussed what would happen if I died unexpectedly. They'd actually researched the trust's death benefit provisions and calculated exactly how much she'd inherit as my widow. $47 million conservatively, she'd written. More if the investments continue performing well. Plus the life insurance policies, the apartment, everything else. "Marcus, we'd be set for 10 lifetimes. His response: "Too bad he's so healthy. Guys like him live forever." Maybe, maybe not. He works crazy hours, lots of stress. Men his age drop dead from heart attacks all the time. And he's been talking about taking up extreme sports lately: mountain climbing, helicopter skiing. Rich guys love their dangerous hobbies. I actually vomited after reading that exchange. My own wife was casually discussing the financial benefits of my death with her lover, as if I were a life insurance policy rather than a human being. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Sabrina, watching her peaceful face in the moonlight, wondering how long she'd been living this double life. How many times had she kissed me goodnight while planning my financial destruction? How many family dinners had she sat through, smiling and playing the loving wife, while calculating the exact dollar value of our marriage? I spent the next several weeks in a state of controlled fury, gathering evidence while maintaining the facade of normalcy. I hired a private investigator to document her affair, installed software to monitor her computer usage, and began working with a forensic accountant to trace any unauthorized access to our financial information. The evidence was overwhelming. Sabrina had been living 2 completely separate lives with stunning efficiency. During the day, she was Brandon Whitmore's devoted wife, attending charity events and playing the role of the successful businessman's partner. In the evenings, she was Marcus's girlfriend, staying in luxury hotels and taking weekend trips that she disguised as work commitments. She'd even started using a fake name, Sabrina Blake, when she was with Marcus, telling him she was recently divorced from a wealthy husband and looking for a fresh start. Marcus had no idea she was still married to me. He thought he was dating a wealthy divorcee who was about to receive a massive settlement. The most damaging discovery came when I found copies of legal documents she'd been secretly filing, Without my knowledge, she'd been working with a law firm to establish grounds for divorce that would maximize her settlement from the family trust. She'd documented imaginary instances of emotional abuse, claimed that I'd isolated her from friends and family, and even suggested that she'd contributed significantly to building my career success. Every single claim was a lie, but they were crafted carefully to exploit loopholes in our prenuptial agreement and challenge the trust's spousal benefit limitations. The prenup we'd signed before marriage was comprehensive, but it had been written to protect against a normal divorce, not a calculated fraud scheme. Sabrina's lawyers had identified several potential weaknesses: if she could prove that I'd hidden assets during our marriage, or if she could demonstrate that the prenup was signed under duress, or if she could establish that she'd made substantial contributions to my career advancement, she might be able to void the agreement entirely. She'd been building this case for months, creating false documentation and manufacturing evidence to support her claims. She'd even been secretly recording our conversations, hoping to capture something that could be used against me in court. I realized that confronting her directly would be a mistake. If she knew I was aware of her plan, she might accelerate her timeline or destroy evidence. Instead, I decided to let her make the first move while I prepared my own counter-strategy. The waiting was excruciating. Every morning I'd wake up next to someone who was plotting my financial destruction. Every evening I'd come home to find her preparing dinner and asking about my day, knowing that she was calculating how much longer she needed to maintain the charade. Finally, 3 weeks ago, she made her move. It started with what seemed like a normal conversation over breakfast. Sabrina was unusually quiet, pushing her eggs around her plate without eating. I could sense something was building, but I forced myself to act naturally. "Brandon," she said eventually, not meeting my eyes, "we need to talk about something important." My heart rate spiked, but I kept my voice steady. "What's on your mind?" "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about our marriage, about what I want from life, and She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I think we need to consider the possibility that we might be better off apart." The performance was masterful. She managed to look genuinely conflicted, even tearful. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed she was struggling with a difficult decision rather than executing a plan she'd been developing for over a year. "This is sudden," I said carefully. "What's brought this on?" "It's not sudden, really. I've been feeling disconnected from you for a long time. We want different things, Brandon. You're so focused on work and building wealth, and I need someone who can be present with me emotionally." She went on to describe feeling neglected and undervalued, painting a picture of a marriage where she'd been taken for granted despite her devotion and support. Every word was calculated to establish the narrative she'd need for the divorce proceedings. "I don't want to hurt you," she continued, reaching across the table to take my hand. "But I think we both deserve to be happy, and I don't think we can find that happiness together anymore." The touch of her hand made my skin crawl, knowing what I knew about her real motivations. But I played my part, expressing shock and sadness, asking if we could try counseling, begging her to reconsider. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," she said, delivering the line she'd probably rehearsed dozens of times. "I want this to be as amicable as possible. We can work out a fair settlement that protects both of us." That evening, after she'd gone to what she claimed was a support group for people going through divorce, I knew she was actually meeting with Marcus to celebrate the successful launch of their plan. I used the time to make final preparations for my counterattack. I'd spent weeks working with my own legal team, headed by Margaret Chen, one of the most ruthless divorce attorneys in New York. Margaret specialized in cases involving high-net-worth individuals, and had a reputation for destroying opponents who tried to defraud her clients. "This is one of the most blatant cases of marital fraud I've ever seen," Margaret had told me after reviewing all the evidence. "She's not just cheating, she's running a con game. The documentation you've gathered is enough to not only protect your assets but to pursue criminal charges if we choose to." We'd prepared a comprehensive response that would demolish every aspect of Sabrina's strategy. The prenup she thought she could challenge was actually ironclad when properly defended. The trust provisions she'd misunderstood would leave her with exactly nothing in the event of divorce for cause, and the evidence of her affair and fraud would make any judge dismiss her claims with prejudice. But I wanted her to reveal the full scope of her plan before we acted. I needed to know exactly how deep her betrayal went, and whether there were other accomplices I hadn't discovered. Over the next several days, Sabrina played the role of the reluctant but determined wife who'd made a difficult decision for both our sakes. She talked about dividing our assets fairly, suggested we could remain friends after the divorce, and even offered to help me find a new apartment since she wanted to keep our penthouse. "I know this is hard," she said one evening, sitting beside me on the couch where we'd spent countless nights watching movies together, "but I think you'll be happier in the long run. You'll find someone who appreciates your ambition and drive. I'm just not that person anymore." The manipulation was breathtaking. She was positioning herself as the selfless party who was setting me free to find true happiness, all while planning to walk away with tens of millions of dollars that she had no legal right to claim. Meanwhile, my private investigator continued documenting her activities. She was spending increasingly more time with Marcus, staying overnight at hotels and even looking at apartments where they could live together after her settlement came through. They'd started shopping for luxury cars and planning exotic vacations, spending money they didn't yet have on the assumption that their plan would succeed. The most revealing evidence came from a recording device I'd placed in her car. During a drive with Marcus, thinking they were completely private, they'd discussed their strategy in detail. "The lawyers think we have a strong case," Sabrina had said. "Even if the prenup holds up, they found some issues with how the trust was structured. If Brandon's grandparents didn't properly account for spousal rights under current New York law, I might be entitled to a much larger share than anyone realizes." Marcus had asked about timing, and Sabrina's response chilled me to the bone. 6 months, maybe less. Once the divorce is final and I get my settlement, we can be together openly, and if something happens to Brandon before then, if the stress of losing everything causes health problems, I'd inherit even more as his grieving widow. "You think the divorce stress might affect his health? Men like Brandon don't handle failure well. When he realizes he's going to lose the marriage, the money, and his reputation, who knows how he'll react. Rich guys have been known to make very poor decisions when their world falls apart." They were actually hoping that the divorce proceedings would break me mentally or physically, potentially leading to even greater financial benefits for them. The callousness was almost unimaginable. That's when I decided it was time to end their fantasy. I chose a Friday evening for the confrontation, knowing that Sabrina was planning to spend the weekend with Marcus at a resort in the Catskills. She'd told me she needed space to think and would be staying with her sister in Connecticut, but I knew exactly where she'd be and with whom. "Sabrina," I said as she was packing her overnight bag, "before you go, there's something we need to discuss." She looked up with that practiced expression of patient concern. "What is it, Brandon? I thought we'd covered everything about the separation." "We have, but there are a few details about our finances that I think you might find interesting." I pulled out a thick folder of documents and spread them across our dining room table. Bank statements, trust documentation, prenuptial agreement analyses, and private investigator reports. "I've been doing some research of my own," I said calmly, "and I discovered some fascinating information about spousal rights in high-net-worth divorces." Her face went pale as she recognized some of the documents. "Brandon, what is this?" "It's the truth, Sabrina, about our marriage, about your affair with Marcus Rodriguez, about your plan to defraud the family trust, and about your complete miscalculation of how the law actually works in cases like this." She tried to maintain her composure, but I could see panic creeping into her eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about." "What affair? Who is Marcus Rodriguez?" I pulled out a photograph of her and Marcus kissing outside a Manhattan hotel. "Marcus Rodriguez, 28 years old, personal trainer at Equinox Columbus Circle. Your boyfriend for the past 14 months. The man you've been planning to run away with after you steal my family's money." Her hands were shaking now, but she made one last attempt at deception. "Brandon, you're clearly under a lot of stress. Maybe you should talk to someone." "Should I call him?" I interrupted, holding up my phone. "I have his number. We could invite him over to discuss your weekend plans together." The facade finally cracked. Sabrina's carefully maintained mask of concern dissolved into raw fear and anger. "Fine," she snapped. "Yes, I've been seeing someone else. Our marriage has been dead for years, Brandon. You're never here, you don't care about my needs, and all you think about is money. Can you blame me for finding someone who actually appreciates me? Someone who appreciates your plan to steal $50 million, you mean?" "It's not stealing. I'm your wife. I have rights." I opened the prenuptial agreement to a section I'd highlighted in yellow. "Actually, you don't." Section 12. Subsection C clearly states that any spouse who commits adultery during the marriage forfeits all claims to marital assets beyond their own property brought into the marriage. Her mouth fell open. That can't be legal. It's completely legal. You signed it. Your own lawyer reviewed it. And adultery is defined very specifically to include both physical affairs and financial conspiracy with outside parties to defraud the family trust. I showed her another document. This is a forensic accounting of all the research you've done on our family finances, all the documents you've photographed, all the unauthorized access to confidential information. Under New York law, this constitutes attempted fraud, which voids any spousal protections you might have had. You can't prove any of this. I pulled out my laptop and played one of the recordings from her car. Her own voice filled the room, discussing the timeline for their plan and expressing hope that the divorce stress might cause me to have health problems. The blood drained from her face as she listened to herself casually discussing the potential benefits of my death. 14 months of recordings, Sabrina. Hundreds of text messages, financial records showing unauthorized access to family accounts, documentation of every lie you've told and every dollar you've spent planning this fraud. She collapsed into a chair, finally understanding the scope of what I'd discovered. Brandon, please. Let me explain. Explain what? How you married me for money? How you've been planning to rob my family for over a year? How you've been hoping I'd die so you could inherit everything? It wasn't like that. I did love you at first. But you changed, Brandon. You became obsessed with work and money, and I felt like I was married to a stranger. So you decided to take half of everything and run away with your personal trainer? I deserve something for the years I've spent as your wife. I've supported your career. I've been there for family events. I've played the role of the perfect spouse while you ignored me for months at a time. And you deserve exactly what the prenup says you deserve for breaking the terms of our marriage. Nothing. She tried a different approach, switching to tears and pleading. Brandon, we can work this out. I'll end things with Marcus. We can try counseling. Please don't destroy me over this. You destroyed yourself, Sabrina. I'm just making sure you don't take my family's legacy down with you. I showed her the final document in my folder, a lawsuit filed against her for attempted fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy to commit theft. My lawyers have already filed this with the court. You're being sued for damages, legal fees, and restitution for all the money you've spent over the past year planning this scheme. You can't sue me for divorce. I'm not suing you for divorce. I'm suing you for fraud. The divorce is just a byproduct. And according to our prenup, since you've committed adultery and attempted to defraud the family trust, you're not entitled to any settlement at all. In fact, you're responsible for all legal costs associated with defending against your false claims. The reality was finally sinking in. Not only would she not get any money from our divorce, but she'd also face a civil lawsuit that could leave her financially ruined. What about Marcus? She asked weakly. What about him? He's been dating a woman who told him she was divorced and wealthy. When he finds out you're actually married and broke, how do you think that relationship will work out? As if on cue, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Marcus. Babe, ready for our weekend getaway? Can't wait to celebrate your freedom and our future together. I couldn't help but smile. You should probably call him. Let him know that the celebration is canceled and the future he's been planning doesn't exist. Sabrina stared at the phone, then at me, then at the document spread across the table. You've ruined everything. No, Sabrina, you ruined everything. I just made sure you couldn't ruin anything else. She left that night, taking only the clothes she'd brought into our marriage. I never saw her again. The legal proceedings took 3 months. Sabrina hired an expensive lawyer with money she didn't have, trying to challenge every aspect of our case. But the evidence was overwhelming, and her attorney eventually advised her to settle rather than face criminal charges for fraud. In the end, she received exactly what she was entitled to under our prenuptial agreement, nothing. She was also ordered to pay all legal costs for both sides, which amounted to nearly $200,000. Marcus disappeared from her life the moment he realized she wasn't the wealthy divorcee she'd pretended to be. According to my investigator's final report, he was dating another older woman within 2 weeks, someone who actually had the money Sabrina had promised. Sabrina's interior design business collapsed when word of the scandal spread through Manhattan's social circles. Nobody wanted to hire someone who'd tried to defraud her own husband's family. She eventually moved back to Ohio, where she'd grown up, and found work at a chain furniture store. The divorce was finalized 6 months ago. I kept our apartment, our shared assets, and my dignity. More importantly, I kept my family's trust intact for future generations, which had been the real target of her scheme all along. I learned valuable lessons about the difference between love and calculation, between partnership and parasitism. The woman I'd thought I married had never existed. She'd been a carefully constructed persona designed to gain access to wealth that she could never have earned on her own merit. These days, I'm more careful about who I trust and why. I still work in private equity, but I've also started a foundation that helps people who've been victims of financial fraud within their own families. It's surprisingly common, and the damage goes far beyond money. Sometimes I wonder if Sabrina ever truly loved me, or if she saw dollar signs from the moment we met. I'll never know for certain, but I've made peace with the fact that it doesn't matter. What matters is that I recognized the truth before it was too late, and had the strength to protect what my family had built over generations. I learned that sometimes the most expensive lesson is discovering someone's true price for your heart, and realizing that your worth was never measured in the numbers they were calculating, but in your ability to see through their deception and choose your own value over their greed. The penthouse feels different now, lighter somehow, as if a weight I didn't know I was carrying has been lifted. I've redecorated, removing all traces of Sabrina's influence, and creating a space that reflects who I actually am, rather than who someone else wanted me to be. I'm not bitter, though many people expect me to be. I'm grateful that I discovered the truth, grateful that my family's legacy is protected, and grateful that I learned the difference between someone who loves you and someone who loves what you can provide for them. Some nights I still think about those text messages where she and Marcus discuss the financial benefits of my death. It reminds me that I wasn't just married to someone who didn't love me. I was married to someone who would have profited from my destruction. That realization could have broken me, but instead, it freed me. Now I know that real love doesn't come with spreadsheets calculating inheritance potential. Real partnership doesn't involve secret lawyers and hidden bank accounts. And real commitment doesn't include backup plans with personal trainers who think you're divorced. I'm 36 years old, financially secure, and finally free to find someone who wants to build a life with me rather than steal the one I've already built. And when I do find that person, I'll know the difference, because I've seen what the alternative looks like, and I'll never mistake calculation for affection again. The trust my grandparents established will continue growing for future generations, protected from those who see family legacy as personal opportunity. And I'll continue building on what they started, knowing that the greatest inheritance I can leave behind isn't money. It's the wisdom to recognize the difference between love and fraud, and the strength to choose accordingly.